Good afternoon, and welcome to the second in a series of programs from the North Central Region SARE and Ohio SARE. This program is part of the Beginning Farmers and Rancher Initiatives. I am Suzanne Mills-Wasnick, OSU Extension Educator for Agriculture and Natural Resources in Montgomery County. We are recording this program and will make the recording available as soon as possible. I ask that you put your questions in the Q&A box, which I will be monitoring. Now I would like to turn the program over to our presenter, and she will introduce herself. Thank you very much and look forward to the presentation.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. My name is Jeannie Bernick. I am with Keiko ISOM. In fact, here's a slide a little bit about me. I'm a consultant with our firm, which is a business advisory and tax and accounting firm that specializes in food and agriculture. But I've had a history of working with, in particular, women who come back to work on their farming operations or are in leadership or management roles in agribusiness. And so the topic today, which is how men and women can work better together, is something that's really dear to my heart. And as you can see here on this slide, I was the former editor of Top Producer magazine, and during that time helped create the Executive Women in Ag Conference about a decade ago. And then I also co-authored a book called Cirrus Rising about how women are leading farm business. So lots of stories and history and experiences working with women on farms. And I have a blog where I share some of those things that happen at Boots and Biz. So a little bit about me, a little bit about some of the resources. And then again, here's the book if you guys want some more resources as you go forward. But I love to speak about this topic because women working in agriculture today are really faced with so many opportunities, but yet there's still some challenges. And I want to talk, I can only talk from a female perspective, but I want to really talk about what I've learned in working with farmers like this lady here, Kristen Duncanson up in Minnesota, and the things that that they have kind of worked through to make their working relationships better, not only with their partners or spouses, but also the men in their farming operations, the men in their communities, the collaboration, the diversity of ideas, and how things have improved by working on some different skill sets. Before I start though, just a quick update on the agenda of kind of how the day will go. I am going to talk a little bit about the history of women in agriculture because I think it will help set the tone for how we understand some of the ways that we think about our working relationships in ag. I'm going to talk about where women in ag are now and kind of what is the path forward in working together. So let's take a kind of a little trip down memory lane here and look back at the history of women in agriculture. And, you know, women have always played a critical role in farming since the settlement of this country. And, but a lot of times it's been sort of as an invisible role. Their work has been operating kind of behind the scenes. You know, it wasn't until the 1920s and 30s before the widow's tax where, you know, women were even allowed to own farm ground or own land if they were married. And even though they had great contribution to American agriculture, their work was never even recorded by the Department of Agriculture until the 1930s. So it's really interesting to think about all of us who grew up on farms, and we look back at some of those memory books and we see our mothers and our grandmothers and our great grandmothers and our aunts, you know, working very hard on these farming operations. But the reality is that they were not recorded in history or in you know, statistics for quite a while until the 20s. You know, you could go back even further and think a little bit about some of the first seed savers were Native American women and how they would manage the seed supply for the next planting season, next harvest. If you think about what a woman's job on the farm meant, it was often bookkeeping or attending the family garden. There's a lot of sustainability for the family, which is so interesting because sustainability is such a popular word now. And I often think about the clothing that was worn by some of the women that, if you look back in the pictures, it was usually created to have a utilitarian aspect to it for farming. So in this picture, you can see here picking cotton. A lot of times the clothing was so that they could also put the cotton inside the clothing. And then even my great grandmothers had these sort of overdresses, and they had these big pockets in the front. And the purpose of those pockets was to collect eggs. And so you think about how much of particularly rural women's lives were spent around that sustainable, making sure that the family had the food they needed. You know, even back in the 1900s, if women were widowed, they kept farming. And in 1900, there is some history recorded that farming was the top list of employment for women, which makes sense. And in 1938, the Farm Security Administration estimated that women's income from poultry and dairy operations provided 40 to 50% of the household budget. So very, very important, their role in the family farm and in agriculture way back when. One more thing I want to share from a history that I learned in the work and in the research for my book was about a group of women who were part of the Women's Land Army of America, and they were called the Farmerettes. And I'd never heard of the Farmerettes, but they took over the farm work when men were called to wartime service in World War I. And so these farmerettes were paid the same wage as male laborers, which was 25 cents an hour, $2 a day. And they would kind of roll into town in these wagons, and they would share a home outside the farm where they worked, and they do the planting, the hoeing, the plowing, the milking. Many of the women who signed up for this had never worked on a farm, but they were given uniforms, they were paid well. And there's an interview with one of them where they asked if one of the farmerettes, if the strenuous labor might prove too hard and if they would want to quit. And the recruit said, "Why would we quit? Our soldiers won't quit, and neither will we." So just a great story, you know, of something I had not learned about, but thinking about women in agriculture back during this time of World War I. So that's a trip down a history path. Let's look at where we are today. So today women make up, and this number has risen since the census, 31% of all farmers. They run about 14% as principal operators of US farms and own more than 30% of farmland. Women have made incredible strides when it comes to agriculture. And yet, by comparison, if you look at women in other professional fields like technology, women make up more than 60% of the professionals in the technology field in terms of principal operators or owners of a tech company. So we have a ways to go in terms of evening out the gender gap there, but really pretty incredible to think about just how many women are owning farmland today. Here's another way to look at it. Oops, go back one, where we look at it by acres. So 62.7 million acres farmed by women principal operators. And I love the thinking about FFA as well, and that, you know, we're rising. I think it might actually this year have tipped over the 50% perspective of 50% of FFA members are girls, many of them serving in the state leadership roles. So we have a really strong interest from young women who want to come into agriculture, and there's just a growing set of opportunities for women who want to come back to the land. If you look geographically at where women in agriculture are, they are typically on the coastline. So this is 25% or more farms with female principal operators are in these dark blue areas. And the reason for that is because many of the principal operators are small holder operations. And so a lot of vegetable, fruit, small acreage opportunities. And we're finding most of those around the coastlines. But it's just kind of it gives you a perspective of where you're seeing the geographic spread of female principal operators. Texas has the most female farmers. Arizona has the highest proportion of farmers, but they come in all shapes and sizes of production. And in Ohio, this is how your state shakes out. 28% of Ohio farmers are women. So really see in the Midwest some great strides being made by women who are coming back to manage larger commodity crop operations and even livestock and feedlots. When I think about some of the other statistics that I pulled, it's not that women are simply raising crops. They're really raising food, and they have a lot of focus on producing all types of food. And they come about it from sort of a different perspective of women. They say women farmers often think about the kitchen and feeding people when they think about the fields. And I don't know if that can be said for men as well, but I think that's an interesting perspective to give it, is that women still hold more than 50% of the consumer dollar. And so if you think about a female farmer, she's going to come at her farming operation from a different lens, which is really important when we start to think about women and men working together in agriculture. Is what lens are they seeing the farm or the ag operation through? You can see here some other interesting statistics. We're seeing younger women entering farming. We're seeing them change careers, which I'll talk about in a little bit, to engage in agriculture. Technology has been a huge boost to helping women come back into the operation because, there's a woman I've worked with who runs a big dairy, and she used to say, when I was growing up, you had to have 4 arms the size of a fence post in order to run some of the tractors and the equipment around here. But today, with hydraulics and technology, and she's a petite lady, anybody can run some of the machinery. And so you think about how technology has allowed it so that people with disabilities, no matter the gender, no matter the size, can come in and work on a farm. So that's really helped change the dynamic between men and women in operations. And again, like I said, women will look at a wheat in the field as food versus a plant. And so remember to think about those lenses when we start to work with women and men in ag together. There is, however, it's what they call the grass ceiling in agriculture and in gender studies in agriculture, instead of the glass ceiling, which is clever. But the reality is that 91% of women operated farms have sales less than 50,000. So it's still a lot of small holder operations. And we really need to push to see women coming back and taking on larger, like I said, commodity crop, and becoming principal operators there. I think, and I see in some of the bigger operations that I work with, technology is really helping, like I said, to make that happen. If you think about it, you can be in the middle of a rural town in Iowa or Ohio or the Dakotas, and you can run an entire business from your iPhone. I mean, think about what people do with Etsy. And so what we see is a lot of women taking advantage of technology, using video conferencing and FaceTime and Google Hangouts to work with their vendors and their service providers. I was working with a woman producer the other day who was talking about or planning some of their seed purchases for the year. And instead of having, the seed salesman come to her doorstep, they were using Google Hangouts, and he was showing her everything on there. And it's just so seamless and allows so many more discussions to be able to happen and more knowledge that I think women are taking advantage of to gain more skill sets in agriculture. Also, women tend to have just a bent toward a co-op mentality. I have lots of women producers who are sharing accountants right now. So maybe the farm has gotten big enough that the bookkeeping is beyond them, and they need to do some more managerial accounting or need some help with some different enterprises. And so rather than hire a in-house CFO or an in-house accountant, they're pairing with 3 other farms in the region and sharing a CFO, and each paying into that a percentage to get access to a 6-figure level accountant. So really think about how women are able to collaborate in a way that maybe hasn't happened before in male-dominated operations. So that's been a positive. The other thing is, I think women are starting to see more role models in mainstream business that's giving them the empowerment to come back and work in their operations. So these names are names of companies that are started and owned and founded and run by women, and they're popular companies. And also we're starting to see the research that proves that businesses with women are very successful. First Round Capital did a survey of all of their investments and found that the firms that they invested in that had female operators in the management and above showed 64% better performance. So the statistics are starting to come in that a diversity at the management level really proves out for a bottom line as well. We're also seeing more sources of funding for women, and that still continues to be the biggest funding, and financials still continue to be the biggest deterrent to women being involved in agriculture. But what we're seeing is a lot of these angel funds and women-led investment groups like the Nebraska Angels, which is run by women who want to support other women who are starting up their businesses. You're starting to see women sort of crowdsource together funding. And so it's making it, it's giving other options than having to go to the local bank, where a lot of women have had some trouble to find financials. So that's an interesting new trend that we're seeing in rural America. They're also just seeing that there's a fourth choice. So, it says right here on this slide, before, if a woman wanted to change what she was doing at the workplace, she could either gut it out where she was, or go to another company, or go to home. And today she can start her own business. And so we're seeing all kinds of new operations and enterprises come out of farming operations for women who've maybe left corporate America and want to come back and start their own side business or side hustle there in the operation, that are now growing into substantial, they're not side hustles anymore, they're substantial enterprises that are really contributing to the bottom line of the family business. When I think about, so I mostly talked about women on the farm, but if we think about women in ag, in the industry, they make up about a third of the ag professional jobs, according to Harvard's Business School's agribusiness program. There's still a challenge of successful role models in the ag industry, but I think that's changing as generations continue to move on. And I believe that there's more and more mentorship programs that are being sponsored by agribusiness and corporate ag, that's really making a huge dent in helping those younger generation women gain expertise and gain support quicker. So that's good to hear. Women in ag and education, you guys might find this really interesting, but at The Ohio State University, females outnumber males. So you can see some of the statistics here, but faculty, when you look in AgCom and agri-science education, the numbers are definitely changing to see more female leaders. And as I mentioned before, this is the updated number, 60% of national FFA officers are women today. So some cool things happening in education that I think can start to share and kind of pull that trend of more women seeing that they have a place in agriculture at the leadership level. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about women in ag globally. I've spent a lot of time in Africa and other places in the world with women in agriculture, and 70% of all farmers globally are women. And so this is really, really important as we think about feeding the world and the work that you all do in Extension. It goes beyond Ohio. And then when you think about globally, the women who bring back that ag income to their developing countries and into their rural areas there, it's critical. It's critical that women are educated in ag and that we recognize that we have to support women in ag globally as well. So just wanted to give you a little bit on those statistics. Okay, so that's our history. That's where women are today. So how can women work better with their male counterparts when it comes to agriculture? So I thought a lot about this when I was asked to speak on this today, and I really kind of looked back at some of the work we've done and some of the research and found some different areas that I think that we can focus on to help make the engagement between men and women better in agriculture. So the first would be to make sure that women have opportunities in leadership roles, both in farming operations and in agribusiness. Right now, women only make up less than 10% of senior executives in some very major agribusiness companies that I've listed here. That I think we need to start seeing some change in. And the reason is that companies dominated by just one type of person, one type of culture, one type of bias or lens that you see through, often have tunnel vision. And so you risk that ability to scale faster if you're only looking through one lens. And so it's really, really important that we start to see more women in leadership roles in agriculture. The problems faced by all women and men, farm and non-farm, are relevant. And so we have to have all the voices at the table. And again, if 50%, more than 50% of the consumer dollar is held by women when they go to buy food and fiber, their voice needs to be at the table when it comes to leadership. So I have a picture here of Pam Johnson. She was the first president of the National Corn Growers Association. And that only happened about 9 years ago. And so Pam talks often about sitting at the boardroom table surrounded by her male counterparts and really realizing that it was so important for her voice to be heard. She had to speak at these meetings because she was setting the tone for all the women behind her who farmed, who have been wanting a voice. And also just owning the fact that if you're invited to the table, if you're voted as the president of the National Corn Growers, there's a reason for you to be there. And so not to be shy and to really engage in those leadership roles. I think that's a big part of extension and education, is helping women understand and empower them that they're needed and they want to be there. And so that's really important. At the same time, it's helping men understand that it's not just a partner or a spouse. It's an equal when it comes to business or board meetings or et cetera. And so having some coaching around some of the crucial conversations, and I'll talk about that in a minute, is really valuable. But it's helpful when you can set up the why. So you guys have all heard of Mr. Wonderful, who is Kevin O'Leary from the popular show Shark Tank. And I heard him speak a couple of years ago, before COVID, of course, and we could actually get out and about. And he said that his most successful business ventures are those with women leaders. So again, helping those around the table understand that the value increases when you have that diversity of women involved is part of the battle right there. Where we are seeing some great inroads, though, is if you look at businesses across if you just spread them out across the table, family businesses are more likely to drive and include and encourage leadership by women compared to non-family. So the Family Business Center of Excellence is a great resource, and these are some of their statistics, but 70% of family businesses are considering a woman for their next CEO. So I think it's interesting in a family business dynamic that you see something a little bit different in terms of value and inclusion of women. So some things to think about from an education perspective. Another area that can really help increase the working engagement between men and women is, like I said, the increased empowerment, but allowing that woman to be at the forefront of the business decisions. So this is a picture of April Hemis. She's a farmer here near me in Hampton, Iowa, and she is the principal operator. Her husband works in town. She's always been the owner of the operation. It was passed down from her father. And she has a lot of stories of how it took her a long time in the community for people to take her seriously. But she had some kind of champions, I'd say, at the seed dealership, at the bank, who really put April, understood her value from the very beginning and put her in the driver's seat when it came to making decisions. Her dad turned over the marketing reins really early to her. And so then she started a peer group of women farmers to teach them grain marketing in her community. And I would say that one of the areas that we're seeing a lot of support and growth in is women peer groups. So any work that can happen with you as educators and extension agents in setting up peer groups is highly valuable. They need that. They need the support of other women. They need to learn from other women. Women learn really great from others. And so if anybody needs help thinking that through, I'm happy to help. But we're seeing more and more peer groups pop up across the country where they're getting that education from each other that they're not able to find anywhere else, especially when they live in a rural area. So, one of my favorite stories is how there's a farmer that I worked with in Idaho, a female farmer, and she needed compost delivered to her farm for her vegetable operation. And she would call and they would say, well, we'll call you back. And finally she called and she's like, I really need this delivered. And they refused to accept her order because they wanted to talk to her husband. And so, imagine if you're constantly having to deal with someone who won't even take your order because you're a female versus a male. So those sort of situations still exist today, unfortunately. And I think we just need to figure out ways to handle them with grace, but also to be strong in that and letting the community know that this is incorrect. South Dakota State University did a study where they looked at the factors leading to success in women-owned businesses. And the top factors were hard work, drive, passion, and adequate financing. So, I always talk to our clients and about like, what's the thing that's keeping you awake at night? And so many times it's them needing to find labor, hardworking labor and employees who have a passion for the farm. And it is unbelievable how many times I have to point them to the woman that's sitting next to them or the daughter who's coming back and say, you've got your best employees right here. Women are known to be hard workers. They are known to have drive and passion. And if they're part of a business, especially if they have an ownership interest, it's going to lead to success. So I think that's really interesting that some of the research supports that. The other thing that's great about thinking about women as your next employee is women aren't doing the work necessarily based on statistics because it's a paycheck. They're looking to work in agriculture because they want more fulfillment. And so you can see here in this study that, the biggest percentage of why these women came back to the farm was an ability to do what they were passionate about. And Lindsay Lusher is the director of the National Young Farmers Coalition, and she talks about that all the time. When she asks young farmers why they're doing this, this is hard. You're not going to make as much money as your buddy on Wall Street. Why are you doing this? It's because they want to live a more fulfilled life. And I particularly think with the millennial generation, fulfillment is something that's higher on their radar than maybe older generations or their parents before them. And so this is something that's really important to keep in mind when women and men work together. If a woman's not feeling fulfilled, no matter how much you pay her, she's going to leave that operation or that business. So really having those tough questions and asking those questions about, is this bringing you joy? Are you fulfilled in the work that you're doing? Is important. And then, we have to acknowledge that women continue to balance work and life. There's no getting around the research and the statistics that women continue to manage more of the family and home and care duties, even if it's elder care. It just more often than not falls on the women's shoulders. So I always say, listen, there's no such thing as a perfect work-life balance. There's seasons in life, and there's ways to work through it. But the work-life juggle, it really isn't just a woman's issue, it's a family issue. And so there's been tons of research, tons of support, tons of ways to work around work-life balance. I was just meeting with a group in Canada of women farmers, and I challenged them because they were talking about the stress of balancing kids and home and childcare and all the things that we do to raise a family. And I challenged them to think about what, if you are compensated at the level of a professional who's not in agriculture, what resources are they taking advantage of that you're not? Maybe they have a nanny. Maybe they have someone who comes in and cleans their home. Maybe they really respect their 9 to 5 hours. Are you doing those same things in your work on the farm? And just because you happen to be on the farm, meaning your work is in your home or right outside your home, you still need to consider it a professional setting. So it's okay to ask for the support you would need that your professional counterpart is asking for in downtown Toronto, versus being in rural Alberta. So just always challenging people to think from a professional perspective, I think, is really helpful when it comes to balancing some of that work-life stuff between men and women. For a lot of women, it takes making the effort to get to know your coworkers and winning over those critical colleagues. And this is a picture of Wendy Winterstein. She's the female president of Iowa State University. And she talked a lot about when she first came into her role as one of the first women leaders in the university, and that she had to really go around and talk to her male colleagues and get other people excited about the projects she was working on, because male or female, your coworkers have their own goals and priorities and competitions for their time. And so taking that effort or making that effort and taking that time to go, particularly with critical colleagues, male or female, and offering that help and hearing where they're coming from pays dividends later on. And also, she talked a lot about accepting constructive criticism with grace. When you're the first at anything, or you're the first woman in an operation, or you're the first child to come home to a family business, it's really easy to be the brunt of that criticism. And just knowing that it's not malintentioned, understanding what you can learn from it, that's what sets senior leaders apart from their junior counterparts, according to Wendy. So some good stuff there. So, even with all of those talking points, there's still some challenges for women working with men in ag. A lot of times there's a boys club, and that just comes from the history of agriculture has been a male dominated industry. This is not a slam against men. It's not a slam against women. It just is what it is. So kind of how to create that space where it's not a boys club, but there's conversations about things that matter to both men and women is really important in an operation. Farming with family is huge when it comes to gender equity. You know, a lot of times, if a male farmer marries a female and she's not from a farming operation, there's a lot to overcome in terms of just familial knowledge and agricultural knowledge, and this is how we've always done it on the farm. And so there's just a lot of conflict resolution that will need to happen when it comes to being in business with family. I talked about the women farm peers. It's often really hard to find a peer for your gender when you're in rural America, and you know, it's not like you're at the water cooler and you can just have conversations. It takes that extra work. And so peer groups are so valuable, and I'd really recommend offering those up as much as possible. There's some physicality that comes with farming that, you know, women counterparts don't have with their professionals who go to work in a air conditioned office in the summertime, and they're out in a feedlot or in a hog barn. And so just understanding that women and men are different physically is so valuable, and making sure that just because we haven't had air conditioning in this shop for years doesn't mean that we shouldn't or we can't. And so just thinking those kind of things through are really important to overcome the challenges. What else can women do to improve the working relationship? Well, I always say, learn from others. And this is a picture of one of my bookshelves. There are so many books out there written by women leaders for women who want to be leaders. And I think encouraging people to learn. This is not a skill set you're necessarily born with. It's how to work with others, no matter the gender. And so really making the effort to be better, to get better, to learn about diversity and culture and gender is important. And this website, my website, Boots and Biz, I try to update books that I've read that have been helpful. So if you need a resource, you can definitely go there. One book that I really, really like, that's based on a lot of statistics, is the book How Remarkable Women Lead. And they offer so many great tips in there, but it's really about being a leader, not a manager, and thinking through those qualities that make the difference between a leader versus a manager. So responsibility, accountability, decisiveness, those are leadership qualities compared to what would be expected at a manager level. One of my favorite points is listen more, speak less. People feel good when they're heard. Oprah, who's interviewed so many people over the years, she said the number one thing people would say after their interview was, "How did I do?" And she said, from billionaires to movie stars to authors, they all ask the same question because everybody wants to be valued. So listening more, speaking less is one way to encourage that better working together. A leader is being part of the solution, not always just, identifying the problem. And then, this book talks a lot about how women and men can give the hard message. So it's really easy for men to praise women when they do well. It's really hard, I've found in my work, for men to be able to give that hard message to women, whether it's because of emotional IQ or history or a million reasons. But learning how to give a hard message in a correct manner is really important for both men and women to learn that skill set. And this book helps quite a bit with that. I also think what I have found in my work is that women need to develop a little more resilience at times. This is a funny book, Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office, but sometimes based on how they were raised or familial norms, they can wear, women can wear a heart on a sleeve, so can men. But how do you develop a resilience where you can learn from a situation and get up the next day and continue to go forward? And you know, some great things that are in this book that I really liked are just, if you fail, you have to still be yourself and don't try to be someone else. Just be yourself, but be resilient. So this is a really, really helpful book, I think, particularly for women. Be engaging and know your values. So this is another great book by Mika Brzezinski, who's a talk show host on The Morning Joe, but she's had a long history of engagement and interviewing men and women across the country. This is a great book on understanding your worth in a business operation. She talks a lot about taking ownership of your professional development, and I speak to women and men about this both. You can't blame others if you don't have a skill set. That's on you to get the skill set that you need. So owning who you become as a professional in a farming operation or in an agribusiness company is really on you as a person, man or woman. So lots of things about kind of boosting your value there that I found helpful for the people I work with. And then negotiation. Women are strong negotiators, but a lot of times they don't know how to negotiate in a business setting. So women negotiate on behalf of others all the time. Their kids, their elderly parents, they negotiate with their spouses, they negotiate in community settings or organizations or volunteer areas. When it comes to business, a lot of women don't have the skill set needed, which is a slightly different skill set when it comes to negotiating with vendors, suppliers, retailers, in a business segment. So this is something I have found that's really helpful to help women and men work together, is learning how to negotiate with each other. One of the biggest mistakes women make is apologizing. Oh, I'm sorry I did this. What are you sorry for? It's a very common word that women use when they're talking, particularly to men. And I'm not sure where it comes from, but it's something that this book talks about how not to do and how to use different terminology when you're negotiating. So ruminating, I think both men and women can do that. Ruminating on a situation. Why did that happen? What do they think about me? How does this feel? Ruminating very rarely leads to a positive outcome. And so helping both men and women learn how to get over some of those problems and learn to be better negotiators is really helpful. So lastly, I just want to end with a Zig Ziglar quote, which is, you can have everything you want in life if you will just help enough other people get what they want. And I think that's at the crux of men and women working together, is you're both driving for the same thing, whether it's family or business or profit or professional advancement. Helping each other is the best way to get there. And just keeping in mind that no matter your gender, your skin color, your cultural background, we're all still part of the human race. And so that's always the most important thing to remember at the end of the day. So with that, I can see if there's any questions that were in the chat box, or if you want to email me, I'm very open and available to answer questions and help. Here's some other resources. I'm on Twitter, but again, my blog, lots of resources I have that I'm happy to share with any of you if you need them. So that's it, Suzanne. I don't see any questions in the chat box. Suzanne, if you're talking, you're muted. Is there anything else? Okay. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and end the presentation, and thank you for your time. I'll stop sharing my screen, and please reach out if you have any other questions or any other concerns. Thank you very much.